and you go next. You can correct me.
I want to see what you say. I have very little to say.
Depends what the questions are.
Okay, the procedure on these is we'll start out, just name and identify yourself, like the Army, name, rank, serial number, and just start a little bit on your own about your connection with Bergdorf Goodman.
Okay, well, I'm Edwin Goodman. Can you hear me on that?
This should be coming up fine.
And you said to describe myself, but I guess in this context, the son of Andrew Goodman and the grandson of Edwin Goodman. And also, you may not know, a graduate. Well, I went to FIT. I took 2 courses as a young man in draping and merchandise mathematics. And that was fun. And I worked at Bergdorf's for about 5 years in a training program which was really created for me in a whole range of activities, mostly in merchandising, but I actually worked in the receiving room first, and then I worked in shipping in the basement, then I worked in the credit department, and then in 6 or 7 different merchandising departments. And I spent 5 years at Bergdorf's. And I've been tangentially involved now as the landlord, but not involved with the business for many years.
And what was it like being connected with a family which was such a really famous merchant family?
Well, I think probably as a young man I didn't have a full appreciation for it. If you grow up in that environment, you tend to take things for granted. But it was as I grew older and traveled around the world and also developed an appreciation for stores in other cities that I saw how favorably we compared, and I came to recognize what an incredible legacy that my grandfather and my father had established.
What did you see that was different or special about Bergdorf Goodman, as you compared it with a world of different stores?
Well, I just think that it's, without being too immodest, really in a class by itself in terms of the elegance, the fashion, also, frankly, the exclusivity. For instance, I learned recently that the average sale at Bergdorf Goodman is something like 3 or 4 times the average dollar value of the sale at Neiman Marcus. Now, you wouldn't think that, but the fact is that Bergdorf is the classic specialty store, not a department store, and it appeals to a very high-end, small segment of the community that commands great fashion, best quality, and a high level of service. And as you travel around, of course, as a consumer unknown around the world, and you have various shopping experiences and visiting experiences, you see that there's really nothing quite like it. I guess that in the non-apparel areas, Harrods is very impressive. And I really think I can't think of another place that I don't want to unduly criticize anyone, but I remember visiting Marshall Fields, and I thought it's huge, but in terms of making a fashion statement and so forth, it's not in the same league. I think the other thing is that the building is quite special, and the environment is exciting. It's a fashion environment that's very exciting, and I've never seen a setting that's comparable, frankly.
If you could explain in the future, it may not be clear to people what the difference is between a specialty store and a department store. because both are big stores with lots of different merchandise. How would you define that difference? Is it just a question of the quality of the material?
Well,
or?
no, it's sort of a joke. Now I'm actually in the investment business, and I invest mostly in retailing enterprises. And as you may know, the trend in recent years has been toward specialty stores in the extreme. That is to say, stores, for instance, that only sell office supplies or only sell cameras or only sell lingerie. And the theory is to provide a vast assortment within a focused category. They call them category killers. And there's a great advantage to that, except that if you're shopping for several different items, you have to do a lot of work. You have to go to all these different stores. So the sort of joke in the industry is that around the year 2020, someone's going to come up with the idea of, they're going to say, hey, what if we put all these different things under one roof and would allow someone to shop and buy anything they wanted under one roof, and we'll call it, a department store. So I think we may see the cycle swing back somewhere around 2020. But basically, a department store to me has always meant a place where you can virtually buy anything. I don't think there are too many that meet that criteria, but Macy's would come close. You can buy furniture, you can buy appliances, you can buy high fashion in the little shop, you can buy men's wear, women's wear, children's wear, etc. And that was the concept, one-stop shopping for all your needs. But I think as the customers over the years, their educational levels advanced, their incomes advanced, there was a segment at the high end, very sophisticated, that wanted the best possible fashion, the most contemporary ideas, particularly women. Women have always led in this area. It's only that men's fashion's only become important really in the last, in my opinion, in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And these are not women that they don't go to Bergdorf's to buy a refrigerator. They go to Bergdorf's to adorn themselves and to buy some hard goods items which are decorative and gift items and so forth. So if you think of an elegant woman adorning herself and her home with discretionary purchases, that would be the specialty that Bergdorf's has, and has done well, I think.
Why did you not continue with working at Bergdorf? I'm
That's
sure
a
you've
very-
been asked that lots of times.
That's very complicated, and I'm not sure that I'm certain of all the reasons myself. But I was very young when I entered the business, not only in years, but I think I was rather immature, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went there out of by default rather than out of conviction. And I was rather idealistic, and I didn't understand then how one might fulfill your idealistic impulses through business, although I do now. And there were a lot of problems in the country, so I left out of certain idealistic impulses. And also I was troubled by a family business is always complicated, And when it works well, nepotism can work positively. We might see it today in Barney's, for example, or it can be very problematic. And I was concerned about that. I had various relatives in the business, and made me uneasy how that might turn out. And I think that I actually made the right decision, but for the wrong reasons. Because what I have seen in retrospect, and my father agreed with this, although he was upset at the time, in order to maintain, of course, shifting, just to make a point another way, if you see the landscape of retailers that have fallen on hard times and disappeared, Orbach's and Franklin Simon and hundreds of others, almost always family businesses. And they fell, I think they fell by the wayside for two reasons. One, of course, they lost their merchandising vision, but also they were financially strapped. And the stores that have been successful, Barney's is another good example, have found a financial partner, in their case, Isaton, who can write major checks to renovate, to expand, to invest. And since we sold the business to what was then Carter Hawley Hale, they've invested enormous amounts of money in renovations, in escalators. And I remember when I left the business, it was doing something like $18 million. And I remember clearly the discussion, we could never go over 20 million. It was impossible because we had space constraints. So the business now does more than $150 million a year, and that required enormous capital expenditure and expansion and elevators and escalators. And in a family business, there's always tension between those that want to live a comfortable lifestyle and take money out of the business, and those who want to reinvest. But even if you make the decision to reinvest everything, it's hard to generate the cash flow in a business, particularly one located in New York, to reinvest and maintain the quality. So I think if we hadn't sold it, the business would have had great difficulty maintaining its status against competitors. I define competitors broadly, but stores like Bloomingdale's and Saks that were part of large corporate enterprises and had a lot of cash and investment capacity.
That makes a lot of sense.
So my father's hope was originally, of course, that he would maintain the family business, but that if he couldn't do that, we would sell it to someone who would nurture it and maintain and expand its reputation. And I think that's worked out well.
I think that they'd be interested too in hearing more about what it was like being young, or any family stories that about the whole family and working there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I remember I got out of college, I went to the Marine Corps, and I got out of the Marine Corps and I married, and I went to work. And, I'd never worked. I'd worked some summer jobs, but I'd never really worked before. And it was really tough. I mean, just physically demanding and psychologically demanding. I remember my daughter called me. I have daughters 28 and 25, and a few years ago my 25-year-old called me, and she had her first job. And she said, "Dad, I can't believe this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, go to work every day for 8 hours? This is what you do as an adult?" I said, "Yeah, that's what most people do." And I had the same reaction, and of course I was working with a couple of Puerto Rican kids in the basement opening boxes, and it was summers like this, it was a summer like this, and it was pretty kind of brutal, not very interesting, although of course you did learn every single detail, how you open the box and check it against the bill of lading and send it down to marking, and they check and so on. After I got through that sort of purgatory there, I went into the, I think it was the marking room, which was more fun. There was a famous lady there named Rose Sagristano. I still remember Rose, who was much tougher than any drill sergeant I had in the Marine Corps, and had a mouth much fouler than any. But she was a great woman with a big heart and a tremendous, well-organized lady. And that was fun. And I would say generally I had a good time. I got along with everybody. I was, of course, conscious of that I was sort of the scion, and they were conscious of that. But I think I was generally liked, and I was a kid, I was just a young kid. And I did have, I think, something of an eye for fashion. My wife tells me that it's terrible living with me, that aspect, because there's not a morning goes by when I don't sort of assess her carefully from a fashion standpoint. I think that's something I learned when I was little in my house at the dinner table, when my sisters would come down even at breakfast to go to school, and they were criticized.
By
my father and my mother too. Mm-hmm. And they had to meet a certain standard. Now, as a boy, I was somewhat spared that, but it did instill this fashion sensitivity, if you will. And so I had that, and I got to work with a lot of talented designers and rather buyers and merchants, and go downtown And I worked with some great ones. Tressel, a woman named Tressel, Julie Tressel, and Charlier. Tressel was the sportswear, and Charlier was actually a great rival of hers, who was one of the founders of Miss Bergdorf, which was a move into more moderate price merchandise. So I got to go around with them and see how they worked. And I also, the thing I liked about the business hall was that I remember that there were a lot of powerful women in the business, unlike many other industries. And I guess so that was fun, but there was a measure of frustration because my job was really as a student. I was really still a student, so I didn't have any direct responsibility, rather a learning assignment. And it's typical to design the perfect program. I don't know how I would change it precisely, but without very clear responsibility, there's only so much observation you can digest, you know. And I worked in the credit department. That was amusing because I learned about the financial status of a lot of people around New York City and who didn't pay their bills. It was quite interesting. Usually the more money, the less timely the payments. And the most satisfying thing I think I did was work on the founding of BG at the time. This was 65, 66. The 60s were upon us in every way, including fashion, or you might say anti-fashion. And I certainly observed, and others agreed finally, that there was a lot of young design that we weren't selling, particularly junior manufacturers of junior sizing. And Franklin Simon, for instance, at the time had the best junior department. It was a whole floor, and I used to go down there and when I was doing the research and walk around there and see if I could see which labels. When I saw something I liked, I'd find out who made it if I could. And then I went down to 7th Avenue and we basically did an edited selection of junior merchandise for young women, and that was very successful, and it was we had rock music, and it was black and white, kinetic kind of design, all modular, and it was a lot of fun. And I was the assistant buyer, with Colette Toohey was the buyer.
Edwin, it was also the first breakaway from the establishment merchandising portrait of Bergdorf Goodman, so that it was a critical change. And the ads that were evolved, as well as the environment in which you did this, was so exciting. Today we call it bridge lines, but you people had it then.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was the most exciting development for a quality specialty store of your caliber.
It was also radically moderate in its pricing for us, and it went well. And the other interesting thing, I don't know who the audience is here for the students, but it was a signature of the time, and I guess my influence, because I came again out of this sort of idealistic impulse of a college student, and my wife and I got the idea we should do more with black designers. Again, this is the midst of the civil rights movement in the 60s, and we did something called Basic Black at Bergdorf's. I don't know if you remember that, but it was a wonderful promotion, of course, a double entendre, and we had identified the best black designers we could find, and we did a fashion show and promoted the merchandise, and it was quite successful. It was fabulous publicity, and we did well with the merchandise.
None of that's available anymore to record visually, is it? Because I don't find any of that material in their ads. They never kept those ads of that period.
I don't know.
Did you keep any?
No, I didn't.
It was such a,
I would be surprised.
Socially, such a very important breakthrough time for Bergdorf, and also your identifying with your age and your age sensitivity is so wonderful.
And it was interesting. Now I don't know what the perspective of all the people there were. They probably thought I was a little crazy, but they would go along with it because the boss's son, But I think actually some of them had to work real hard, and some of them found real talent in terms of the different departments. Leonard Hankin was my father's right-hand man, and for many years, and was quite supportive in that. And I always sensed in Leonard this sort of intellectual who ended up by some quirk of fate in the fashion business. He was always open to sort of insurgent ideas. So it was generally fun. And I remember, there were a lot of interesting people. I was, as a young person, I was able to sort of, and as the boss's son, I had a great opportunity for sort of diverse experience. So not only through this program, but I could have lunch with my father and Leonard Hankin and talk about some larger issue, and then I'd be hanging out in the fur department with a couple of clerks, or a model, an interesting model. I remember Tony in the fur department, and talking about all manner of things, and also getting their perspective to the degree they didn't edit it for me. And I think I was sufficiently disarming so they didn't edit it too much. So that was interesting. And I had a good experience under Mildred Hill, who was a genius in accessories merchandising. And she was a great lady, and Dorothy Weiss and Louise Stacconi worked for her. I remember them well.
Louise who?
Stacconi.
Spell.
She was Stecconni. Louise was the woman who built the hosiery department from rather marginal basics to a high fashion major legwear department. And Louise Weiss was the woman who developed the bags and accessories under Hill. Again, it was interesting to me because Louise, for instance, was a kid from the Bronx, basically, who started out as a clerk and who became, responsible for several $1 million worth of merchandising over years. So I like that. I always liked that about the business. And frankly, I like that about FIT, this idea of, brains and talent rise to the surface in the best American sense, and there were a lot of industries then, less so today, that were terribly hidebound in terms of who could play, who could enter, who could rise, and so forth.
Were you conscious then of how much you were getting out of this? It's so difficult for a son who inherits a position like this, who may have certain ambivalences, to be as aware then as you are now, as you talk about it.
No, I think
what this experience really meant.
I think the short answer is no. I wasn't fully appreciative of it then, although it's hard to know. Your consciousness changes. But I think, as I said before you came, I was quite young and immature and hadn't seen enough of the world to have a full appreciation for what Bergdorf's was and how unique it was and so forth, which I've come to appreciate over the years. And, there were a lot of, I'm just touching the surface. I also, Ethel Franco was in her last years there, and the custom business was still operating. And I remember that was quite interesting, and I remember going to these shows with my mother and father, and then there was sort of a sense of drama. The press would be assembled and the audience would be assembled, and this sort of love seat or divan was kept, and one empty seat sort of kept for my parents and me and maybe Mr. Hank. And at the last moment, my father would appear, and it's a high drama, and the audience would hush, and then they would start the show. There was a lot of show business in the business, and that I think that we talked about the fact that I invest in retailing now. If you talk to people what's going to happen in retailing, I think in a sense Bergdorf was understood this earlier than many, which is that retailing is becoming an entertainment. Those who are successful are creating environments. One extreme, of course, you have Disney and Warner Brothers and so on. But, or if you go out to Mall of America in another way, a place where families go to be entertained. They'll go to the movies. The kids will ride on various rides they have there, and they have 103 restaurants, and people go there for 8 hours. The whole family. Of course, if you're in, I don't want to offend Midwesterners, but if you're in Minnesota in the winter, there are not many choices. But I think that's, in a sense, Bergdorf. If you went there, you asked me why it was special. It was for a few women to go there, spend 3 hours, have lunch, spend another hour and a half, it was really tremendous entertainment. The aesthetics of the place, there might be a fashion show, there might be a jewelry designer discussing his work, and the whole thing was an excitement, an experience. And buying merchandise, of course, was part of it, but it was exactly the opposite. And I think Questrom's talked about this, the challenge for big stores. It was exactly the opposite of the direction of retailing has gone in the last 10 years, which is, with working women particularly, get the lady in, allow her to purchase her package in minimum time, and get her out. This was quite different. This was like, you could go to the Metropolitan for 3 hours, or you could go shopping for 3 hours. It was kind of
Other era. It was other era. Would you be able to project how the experience and the time that you spent, the learning tree time at the store, what you have taken from it that has been of value and benefit in the work that you're doing now? And I don't know if you told Valerie what you're doing now, but I think it's important.
I touched on it, and I think that, in a way, I think a lot of the lessons, if you will, the imprint, I was not fully aware of. When I got into the investment business, I've invested in a lot of industries, but I've had most success in retailing, and my partners have urged me to invest more and more in retailing and in direct marketing. And it was clear that I think A, I have a feel for it, and B, having been brought up in fashion since I can remember, you just take away experience from it that you bring to bear you don't even know you have. So the way that I look at a business plan for a retail operation, and the way I visit a store, and the kinds of questions I ask an entrepreneur, I think come out of that experience. And I found, in one instance, just as example, John Peterman, which is a catalog company that I'm leaving to go to a meeting there tomorrow.
You tell them we love them. Tell them we love them. I keep everyone. I have a library of them. I just love to look at them.
But I liked it when I saw the catalog. I think most men my age, if they saw the catalog, would sort of push it across the table to their wife. But I read it with some care. I actually saw a New Yorker ad, and I had my colleague call and say, find out these people need money. Well, to make a long story short, he had spoken to a lot of venture capitalists, but we had such rapport. We had dinner, and by coffee, we knew we were going to do a deal together, because I understood his vision for the company. I could understand this sense of fashion, what he was trying to do, some of the difficult challenges he had. For instance, he's planning retail units now, and he wants, they have to be organized and well stocked and so on, but he also wants to create a sense of serendipity, like you wander up to your grandmother's attic and you find these things. So that was why I think we got that deal, because our money is no different than anyone else's. But I just had a good rapport with John, and now the business is doing quite nicely. So, you are the sum of your experiences, and that was indelible.
Love that.
I was 22 to 27 or 8 at the business, and it was it was a very impressionable time. So, and I was saying before you came in, Estelle, it affects me personally a lot. My wife goes crazy, because I'm always checking women out to see how they look and dress. And it's
she knows it's professional.
It's not good to live. It's not good to live with someone like that. It's very.
Incidentally, I kept that Adirondack catalog for you. I have to bring it to you, because I think you should check them out and see if they need money. It's sick.
Good.
Every one is better than the next.
Good, true. And sometimes I think that there's some frustration, because in my business, some of the retail, I cite Peterman, but I've had other retailing activities that have little to do with fashion. And one of the difficulties of the fashion business is, from the point of view of Wall Street, is how do you make it big enough and dynamic enough so that it's attractive for investors? And also, how do you, I mean, there are many examples that have, Calvin Klein and Polo and Donna Karan and so on, but it's really, what you do when you invest in that kind of company is you add fashion risk to all the other risks. And most people aren't willing to take that risk. And it's a very tough call, because it's like akin to investing in films and Broadway. It's treacherous.
More treacherous than a Broadway show?
I think similar.
Similar.
More treacherous than investing in companies that manufacture computers, or companies that manufacture software, or companies that they.
But
So-
but what you're really saying is that you're able to, because of your background, able to interpret fashion as culture, as social change, as a view from the bridge in terms of sociological patterns, and you do not see fashion merely as a hemline change.
Oh, no.
You see it in this broad dimension, which is what FIT keeps trying to help not just Wall Street to understand,
Right.
But to help its own board to understand that the college is more than about teaching young people how to cut a dress or a suit and then to sell it, that it is really tuning in on the psychological, sociological changes that are driving business change.
Absolutely.
Now, if you understand that, then you know that these students are equipped with a certain built-in educational advantage that makes them an asset in any business,
Oh, yeah,
because
that's
they've
right.
given this sense of the rhythm of the
Right.
business. Yeah, am I right?
Absolutely, yeah. They talk to me about Bergdorf's occasionally, and although I don't have any control over Bergdorf's, which I explain to them, they insist on criticizing. And I hear the same things said that were said by my sisters and sometimes by me to my father. If you're going to be in a fashion business and you have children and friends, accept the fact that you're going to receive constant reviews all the time, unlike being in the manufacturing nuts and bolts, just the nature of it. But there's always this impatience of the young, the feeling the place isn't hip enough, that, they'll tell me Barney's has got better stuff here, or they read all the magazines and they see the Calvin Klein line, they see we have the dullest 3 dresses and these 5 dresses that are fabulous, we don't carry them. And there's a certain kind of, I think it's a condition of life, a sort of insurgency of the young, discontent, the desire to be more expansive, more experimental. And the store's challenge is to, of course, maintain their constituency while expanding it.
But what I think is wonderful is that you're saying that the next generation of the Goodmans, the Goodman family, still feels an equity interest in the store, that they haven't walked away from it. They haven't said,
No.
That's not us, or that was my grandpapa, or,
Well, my daughter Sarah has said to me, we've talked about, she would love to, be in the fashion business if we still have the store. And I said, well, you can't turn back the clock. But I think she's also, interestingly, they're ambivalent, young people have ambivalent themes. So she's very interested in fashion, she dresses, she's a very hip dresser, and she spends too much money. And she's always got things to say about fashion. But she's going to law school this fall, and she's volunteering with Lawyers for Children. And she wants to be active in sort of socially causes. So there's always this theme, I think, is the fascination with fashion, but for young people don't understand the things that Estelle has said, the substance of it, and the enormous economic impact of it. And I said to you earlier, certain idealistic impulses took me away from the business because I was too young to appreciate the enormous impact that such a successful business can have. But that's, ancient history. In any event, those themes continue with young people, and as to what their definition of what's worthwhile, and their appreciation is rather narrow when they're young. And as they
You
get
haven't
on,
talked to the school, have you? You haven't talked to the students yet?
no.
Would you like that opportunity?
I love it.
I'd like very much.
I'm a ham, Estelle. I love it.
Well, I'd like very much for us to set up an opportunity for not just the academic group who should hear from you, but I think there should be a student conference for you. And I think it would be wonderful if some of your children participated. I think that there is, don't you,
Oh, I think that
Valerie?
the students at FIT would love it. There's no question about
I think the students would
that.
like this memory trip, but more important, I think what you bring to it is a reflection on how you felt as son, what I call successor generation,
Right.
about that business, but what you took out of it, which they would not understand unless they heard it from you.
Yeah.
So I would like to make a recommendation to the president that we set up such a forum for students, and maybe we do this on some kind of a consistent guest lecturer basis.
Because a lot of the students are so torn, they're so fascinated, they love it, and their friends wonder, well, is it serious, is it important, is
Yeah.
it superficial, and,
Yeah. But they see it as,
see it.
we still, the fortune still makes us, Wall Street still makes it sound like it's the rag business.
Right.
We still have this time lag where we see the founding men in the business who were immigrant society, whose sons wanted to be lawyers and doctors.
Right.
That has all now changed. So now we know it's chic and it's hot and it's Calvin and it's, and it's Ralph, and you overcome Bronx and Brooklyn by going into this business. But what they don't really get is this broader definition of fashion as a signal of social change, the first signal of social change. And the fact that the black market and the Hispanic market are more tuned in to fashion, that they're on this wavelength, is also a critical
Yeah,
factor.
they're leading it in many
They're
ways,
leading
as you
it.
know. Yeah. And also Sarah is an entrepreneur, which I didn't mention. So that she's has
Well,
her
I
own.
think we should have them both.
She
I
has
think we should be
she has a
generational.
coffee house that she opened in Avenue A
Tell them the name of it. It's
called
wonderful.
Limbo.
Isn't that great?
I asked her why it's called Limbo, and she said that
sitting in
her
limbo.
customers were her customers were between 20 and 30, and that's where most of them were.
I love it. I love it.
But so
It's that
what-
Bob Marley song, too.
Yes.
I think you got it. I think it's wonderful, but I think the best part out of this whole thing about, we'll have this as part of oral history and it'll be part of our historical record, but I want to bring it right now to the students, and I want to make that recommendation.
Have you heard, because I haven't, and I have intended to go and listen. My father made
I heard
tapes.
it.
Oh, you
I
did
heard
hear
it. Oh, yes. I heard it. I heard it. Now, that may be part of it. They may want to listen, in other words, part of the series could
Yeah.
be listening to your dad's tapes. First of all, there'll be all this archival material that'll be part of this document, which we'll have as a
I
written
mean, there's all
document.
sorts of interesting things here. My father didn't want to be in the business when he was young.
Right.
But in those days, you did what you were told. And when I was growing up, you didn't necessarily do what you were told. You did what you wanted to do, And certainly now, my kids would never do what I told them. And that has consequences.
But because you didn't, they now say, we wish we had the store. And I think that's the important thing.
You should have done what you were told, even if they take the prerogative, they don't have to.
Right. But as I said before Estelle came in, I think it would have been problematic in many ways. I was saying that there's so many stores that have gone, died. And they've died because of lack of vision and sense and merchandising, but they've also died for lack of financial resources. The ones that have succeeded have either become part of larger corporate structures or created some kind of special liaison. Barney's is a classic example. There's no way Barney's could realize their vision without Isetan writing these checks.
Right.
And that's working, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, but I think to try and maintain, and those alternatives weren't clear then. The alternatives seem to be maintain your absolute independence as a family business, and then you have limited resource to invest in it, or sell.
Yeah.
And of course, Carter Hawley invested millions to
Right.
keep it au courant,
Yeah.
to fix the
But you see,
plant.
that also was your dad's openness to that, because, you could take the Barney situation. I don't know if Gene and his brothers.
I can't remember his name.
I'll think of it in a minute.
It was a big piece the other day, you may have seen it.
Yeah. If those two young men, what they did could have happened without their dad saying, go, 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 and I'll back you on this. On the other hand, he wouldn't have done it. Older Pressman wouldn't have done it, and they certainly, because there is something about a vested interest of the people who grow it, who make the business, in keeping it as it is.
But the other interesting thing there, I think quite interesting, you talked about fashion as a reflection. This was an exercise in upward mobility. This was a low-end business, a discount menswear business, which the younger generation made a major upmarket fashion business, and that was the way they killed their father. You see, they rebelled against their father.
They rebelled. But how exciting it would be if the cycle, and it will, as you know, reverse itself, because we knew that everybody who was hip and everybody who was in from out of the country got into their Bentleys and their Rollses and their special limousines to go downtown to see what was happening downtown.
Yeah.
Now that they've taken Barney uptown, what can they do to differentiate themselves from Bergdorf?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No,
So this is, they may very easily now, even as Saks is now, setting up offshoot businesses, what we call offshoot businesses that are responsive to outlet retailing.
Right.
Only it won't be outlet retailing, it'll be producing product at a price with a set style sensitivity that makes it different discounting.
Right.
So, I mean, this is how it turns, and that's the dynamic that makes this business so fabulous.
And I heard a speech the other day, I don't know if the IT faculty agree, but a fellow was talking about retailing, and he was saying that of the household names today, 50% will be gone by the year 2000. And there will be an equal number of names we've never heard of today that will be powers in retailing, which I think is exciting, also a little nerve-wracking if you're a retailer.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's this incredibly dynamic business, and, you know, just hard to know. But you take Staples, for example, the business we were in, which is a discount office supply business, and which is now about a $5 billion business in selling to consumer discount office supplies. That's Staples and Office Club, and there's about 4 or 5 of them. Didn't exist in 1985. There was no such business. It was a local stationery store. And the vision of that business was changing the distribution chain, removing the wholesaler, creating large footprint stores with low prices. And that's a business, as I say, that didn't exist in 1985, and now is about a $4 or $5 billion business. So it's quite extraordinary. And of course, there's been the demise of many small stationers.
Yes.
Could you turn this off for 1 minute? I think it might fascinate you to know.
You know, was it a good place? Did she go there, etc.? And the answer is yes. It's a tremendously well-run outfit. But the challenge there, they have the wave of expansion is now engaged in is international, and that will satisfy them for probably 5 years. On the theory, I think correctly, that kids are basically the same everywhere. You can entice them the same way in Germany and Japan and so on. But then they're going to have a problem, and so what are they going to do? And I think they're going to make some acquisitions, perhaps in the office supply, perhaps in pet supply, which is a huge...
Can we pick up what you just said? Let's talk in terms of the bigger issue, because this is part of the seminar series. Are you saying to me that when a concept of this kind, a corporate concept of this kind, grows to a point where you extend it and you now give it global reach, and you've now diversified it, and you keep your merchants tuned in to the new kinds of ways that people are communicating, so now it may be software for computers and so on, you do all that you have to keep expanding the business. There's no way to stabilize a business, to be in it profitably. You have to continue to grow.
Well, I think two answers. if you're a public corporation, if you take Walmart, for example, I was reading an article, Walmart has to add $1,800,000,000 in sales in the next 5 years just to maintain their growth rate, which is about 20%. That's because they're so huge. So they have a different kind of challenge. If you're a public company, how do you keep your stock up? General Motors or Walmart. So my father used to tell me at Bergdorf, I remember quite clearly, we don't want to maximize profits necessarily. We don't want to make more money than anyone in the world. We want to be the best. We want to be distinctive. We want to be the fashion leader. But he had a totally different agenda.
Is that not possible anymore? That's what I'm asking.
I think it's possible for a period, a decade, 15 years, but not possible forever. I don't think it is. Now, you know, I shouldn't say that. On a small scale, I think of Hunting World. You know them?
Yeah.
Quality, maintained, the same guys run it, I think, for
Uniqueness.
35 years.
Uniqueness.
They have their niche, they do very
Well,
well.
Ben and Jerry's is now.
But the point is, you know, what are your aspirations? If you want to run your business, be a leader as you define it, and live well, fine. If you want to maximize wealth,
All right, then that's the.
that's a different issue.
All right, so that's it. And I think this is part of that seminar. I really do. I think these young people have to hear it, because many of them don't understand what the horizons are.
Well, we were-
And many of them idealistically say, you know, I don't have to be as big as Levi Strauss.
Right.
But then is it? There's no in between. So are you going to remain a mom and papa operation? Is it going to be a solo venture?
I think there's so many wonderful cases. Esprit is a fascinating story.
Oh,
For
God.
instance,
Oh, they
they were-
murdered their business?
yeah, they were incredibly creative. They grew, but something, and of course there was
Well,
family
yeah.
strife there. But the point is that they probably couldn't have sold those gay, colorful, youthful, innovative clothes and grown for another 10 years. They had to do something else. And now, of course, you see the gap. I saw a guy the other night, a friend of mine, he's got this beautiful double-breasted navy blue blazer, which looked like Paul Stewart or, you know, Brooks Brothers or whatever. It's $125 at the Gap, you know, made in Indonesia. Really beautiful. You know. So they're coming up. A lady told me the other day she went shopping for her sons at Brooks Brothers. They closed their boys department. Where does she go? She goes to the Gap, which dominates. I'm not talking shorts and t-shirts now. I'm talking suits, sports jackets, shirts, ties, and stuff. That Mom took me to DePinnis. Remember?
Remember?
And anyway, it's
Country.
and then they kid about Ralph Lauren and say when he goes away and he's thinking about designing, he takes all the old DePinnis catalogs and leaves through. Of course, he updates them.
Well, are we ready for your mom?
Right.
Yeah.
You're up.
Mom?
Yeah. You want to sit here, Mom?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I'm gonna listen for a while because I have to leave for a few minutes. Can I get a glass of ice water? Do you want me?
What about you ladies? Would you
I'd
like
like some ice water, that would be nice.
Sure, ice water would be lovely.
How about you?
ice water? Nothing.
And I didn't say good morning to you, Valerie.
Hi. You couldn't. We were in the middle of a word.
I love what you had to say.